Welcome to the Listening Lounge, where we unravel stories and ignite conversations one ear at a time. Here's your host of the Listening Lounge, Derek Dunn.
Hi, and welcome to this edition of the Listening Lounge podcast, where we unravel stories and ignite conversations one ear at a time. I'm Derek Dunn, your host, and I hope you're having a wonderful 4th of July weekend. Now, I have no guest today due to the holiday weekend, and so I want to take a moment here and mention that you can follow the Listening Lounge on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, RJ on the Air, also Listening Lounge YouTube channel, and also on Spotify as well. So we're doing a video edition of it. And you can also find the one that with Mark Turner a couple of weeks ago on that. And I would like to mention I apologize for the audio with that recording. I don't know what happened, but just something that was beyond my control. But so real quick, I just celebrated my birthday on the 4th of July. I turned 35 on Thursday, so I'm a firecracker, baby. Now, I was born, even though my hometown is Fairfield, Illinois, I was actually born in Olney, Illinois. So that's where I was born at. Now, as a kid growing up, I thought the fireworks were for me, but that was not the case at all, because that's not what this holiday is about. It's about an important document in our nation's and world's history, and that is the Declaration of Independence. And so I want to mention some facts here about the Declaration of Independence for a moment. There were 56 delegates who signed the Declaration of Independence of the respective 13 colonies. Now, these men came to be known as the nation's founding fathers. Now, the men were a variety of ages. You had Edward Rutledge, who was only 26 years old at the time, while the oldest was Benjamin Franklin, who was 70 at the time of the signing. Now, two of our future presidents also signed, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. As John Adams became the second president of the United States and Thomas Jefferson became the third. And a fact about both Adams and Jefferson real quick is that they both died on the same day, 50 years later. They both died on July 4th, 1826. So, independence was actually declared on July 2nd, 1776. But the Declaration was officially adopted by the Continental Congress 2 days later on July 4th at the Pennsylvania State House. Now, here's the thing. Understand at the time, again, this is 1776. There were no planes, trains, and automobiles back then. I know I just referenced the John Hughes film classic, but folks in London did not hear about this until over a month after. Just through research, apparently it was August 10th is when folks in London did not hear about it until then. So you didn't have no telephone, didn't have no telegraph either. So kind of a delay there, but they eventually found out about it. John Hancock, he was the one who signed the Declaration of Independence real big. He's known for his large signature on the document. He was president of Congress when the Declaration of Independence was adopted and signed. Now, this is a common story here, and I remember having Gloria Lang as a teacher in 7th grade for American history class. But one of the stories that Gloria told was, Miss Lang, however you want to call her, Miss Lang told the story of how John Hancock signed it so big that he was quoted as saying, "There, I guess King George ought to read that without his spectacles." That's that's actually one of the most common stories. And there's other stories out there. But can I see that? Possibly. And you've heard the phrase being used today is, please sign your John Hancock here. Now, one thought I have is this. At the time the Declaration was being drafted, when it was being written and everything, the Revolutionary War was going on at the time. The war had been going on for over a year. And so, because it started in 1775, the one thought that I have is, and I just can't imagine this happening, but these men who signed, who were creating this document, who were drafting it and signed it, they're heroes in my eyes, but also they had big targets on their back. And so here's a big what if. What if at the time they were composing this document, they were drafting it, and all of a sudden the British happened to barge in? I cannot begin to imagine it. And so that'd be horrific. So I mentioned 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence. So who were these 56 men? Now I'm going to mention their names, and there's a few that I had actually picked at random because they're kind of like lesser known. I mentioned John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Hancock. I mentioned those guys, all right? They're well known. But some of these other guys that signed the Declaration of Independence are lesser known. But when I was doing research on these guys I just selected at random, I found their stories to be very interesting. So we'll start off here. John Hancock, first of all, he was from Massachusetts. Some may say Massachusetts Bay, but he was president of Congress. Obviously, he signed it big. From New Hampshire, Josiah Bartlett. William Whipple. Now, William Whipple, let's talk about him for a moment. He actually commanded a brigade of 4 militia regiments at Saratoga, Battle of Saratoga in 1777. And let's talk about that battle because this was early on, second year of the Revolutionary War, and it proved to be a victory for America. And not only that, but it was a big morale boost for the nation at the time, for the young nation. Another one from New Hampshire who signed it was Matthew Thornton. Massachusetts, you can also say Massachusetts Bay. Samuel Adams, another well-known name. John Adams. Robert Treat Paine. Now, he actually served as the state's first Attorney General and as an associate judge of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, which is the state's highest court. Elbridge Gerry. Rhode Island. We've also seen Rhode Island and Providence plantations. Stephen Hopkins. Now, this story, when I researched this and when I was reading about this, I thought it was fascinating. And let me tell you this about Stephen Hopkins. He signed the Declaration of Independence, but at the time he had worsening palsy of the hands. So to sign his name, here's what he had to do. He was holding his right hand with his left. So he was holding his right hand with his left, and he was signing it kind of like this a little bit. And so he said this when he signed his name on the Declaration of Independence. He was quoted as this, saying, "My hand trembles, but my heart does not." What a fascinating quote. This man was determined to sign the Declaration of Independence. And so I mentioned about the worsening palsy of his hands. He served the Continental Congress until the fall of 1776 and resigned due to failing health. He died in July of 1785. William Ellery also signed the Declaration of Independence as well. We move on down to Connecticut. Got a few here. Roger Sherman. Samuel Huntington. I thought this was fascinating. The home that he was born in was built by his father, Nathaniel, and it still stands today. You can actually see the home yourself. The home was built in 1732. If you're wondering where it's at, it is in Connecticut. It's located within the Scotland, Connecticut area. William Williams and Oliver Wolcott. Got a few from New York. William Floyd. This is interesting. A few weeks after the Declaration was signed, and this happened in August 1776, the British Army, they overran Long Island. They confiscated William's house and estate and used the property as a base for its cavalry. Philip Livingston, Francis Lewis, and Lewis Morris. Let's hop over to New Jersey. Richard Stockton, John Witherspoon, Francis Hopkinson, and John Hart. Let's talk about John Hart for a moment. Prior to the Battle of Monmouth in New Jersey, he invited George Washington and the Continental Army to make camp at his farm. Now, Washington accepted. In June of 1778, Washington and 12,000 of his men were camping on John Hart's land. Hart died shortly after that. In fact, less than a year after that, actually. He died in May of 1779. And through research, what I gathered was he actually had a battle with kidney stones. But I thought that was a fascinating story there. Abraham Clark, another one who signed. Let's look at Pennsylvania. We had several of them here. Robert Morris, Benjamin Rush. Now, Benjamin Rush, if you know someone who is a psychiatrist, or maybe you have the high school student who's interested in psychiatry, college student who is majoring in psychiatry, Benjamin Rush is considered to be the father of American psychiatry because of his study on mental disorders. Benjamin Franklin, John Morton, George Clymer, James Smith, George Taylor, James Wilson, and George Ross. Let's talk about the state of Delaware. Caesar Rodney, George Read. Now, George Read was one of two statesmen who signed 4 of the great state papers on which his country's founding is based: Petition to the King and Continental Association, the Declaration of Independence, and U.S. Constitution. Thomas McKean. In Maryland, Samuel Chase, William Paca, Thomas Stone, Charles Carroll of Carrollton. He turned out to be the longest-lived founding father. He was born on September 19th, 1737. He died on November 14th, 1832, at the age of 95. Another fact about him was he spoke 5 languages fluently. I tell you what, that's pretty cool. Virginia, George Wythe. Richard Henry Lee. Now, this is a big name here, and the reason why he's a big name is because he introduced the Lee Resolution. So, you may have heard the Lee Resolution, but if you have not, it's also known as the Resolution for Independence in June of 1776. The document called for the colony's independence from British rule. His resolution led to the drafting and adoption of the Declaration of Independence. He would serve as a U.S. Senator from Virginia from 1789 to 1792, serving in the first U.S. Senate. So when it comes to kind of like a predecessor to the Declaration of Independence, you have to look at the Lee Resolution. Kind of got, it really kept the gears going in terms of the formation of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, well-known name, mentioned him earlier. Benjamin Harrison. Thomas Nelson Jr. Francis Lightfoot Lee. Carter Braxton. Still got several more names to mention. From North Carolina, William Hopper, Joseph Hughes, John Penn. The only fact I found about John Penn, a historical highway marker honoring him was erected near his home in Stovall, I should say, Stovall, in 1936. It was the first such marker erected by the state. South Carolina, Edward Rutledge, I mentioned him a few minutes ago. He was the youngest person to sign the Declaration of Independence at the age of 26. Thomas Hayward Jr., Thomas Lynch Jr., Arthur Middleton. He served in the defense of Charleston during the Revolutionary War. Now, after the city fell to the British in 1780, he was sent as a prisoner of war to St. Augustine, Florida, until exchange in July the following year. The state of Georgia, Button Gwinnett. I want to talk about Button Gwinnett here for a moment. He was named in honor of his mother's cousin, Barbara Button. Now, I've never been to Atlanta. I've never been to Atlanta, Georgia, but for those of you who have, you may have seen a sign like those signs like, entering, like, so for example, like Wayne County here, we just have the Wayne County county line sign. Well, Gwinnett County in Metro Atlanta is named after him. So whenever you hear Gwinnett County Atlanta, you know what it is. By the way, that's a sound of a train in the background. I don't know if you guys can hear that or not. So I have my mic with the windscreen on, so hopefully I block out some of that sound. Lyman Hall is another one from Georgia who signed. And George Walton. You'll see the train go by to the north. So those are the 56 delegates who signed the Declaration of Independence. Again, I wanted to do a podcast about the Declaration of Independence because you think about fireworks, you think about cookouts, parties, barbecues, and all that. But let's take a moment and reflect on the real reason why we celebrate the 4th of July, why we celebrate this holiday is because it's when our nation wanted, the 13 colonies wanted to become a nation. They want to be free from British rule. And so that's why they signed the Declaration of Independence. So it's the founding of our nation, the founding of our country. So thanks for tuning in to this edition of the Listening Lounge podcast, where we unravel stories and ignite conversations one ear at a time. Have a happy and safe 4th of July weekend. I will be doing some traveling coming up over the next several days, so I'll try to have a podcast done in a couple of weeks later. I'll be doing the podcast every 2 weeks because there's other projects that I do, and so stay tuned for that. Again, you can find the Listening Lounge podcast on our Facebook page, Listening Lounge, also on Instagram, also on the YouTube channels, RJ on the Air and the Listening Lounge, and also on Spotify as well. Look us up on the Listening Lounge. Until then, happy birthday, America. Have a safe and wonderful 4th of July weekend, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.